So, which exam did you do in grade 6 to place you in high school? And how much stress do you remember being under? In 2024, we're still putting our children under high pressure for these grade 6 placement exams. Can we do anything better? Can we do it differently? That's what I want to talk about today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dionne Jackson Miller. All right, so in this video, I'm going to be taking you down memory lane a little bit, talking about some of the different exams we've had that we have our grade 6 children do for them to go to high school, and some of the problems that they've created, and again, what can we do better? So share your thoughts. Really want to hear what you think about this. All right, I did common entrance examination, and we used to do that in January of grade 6. So you did it really early in the year, and then you had the rest of the school year to just slack off and do nothing much. No, I don't know why. What I remember about common entrance are the mental ability exams, so a whole heap of little triangles and shapes that you used to have to figure out where they go, and also the compositions, serious compositions we used to have to write, not the little short things I see them get nowadays. And topics like a day at a cricket match. I don't know why I remember that one, but probably because I don't know nothing about cricket. But I definitely remember that one. Now, common entrance was introduced into Jamaica in about 1957-58 or thereabouts, and it set up this terrible system of educational apartheid that we're still suffering with to this day. So, first of all, this idea of pass, fail. If you pass common entrance, you got to go high school. If you failed it, you are sent to a secondary school, which was definitely an inferior institution. Now, you had 2 chances to pass, 2 chances to take the exam. Children who were born, I think it was September to December, would have 3 chances. And even in a secondary school, even the exams that we did were different. In high school, we did O-levels. In secondary school, there was an exam called SSC, Secondary School Certificate, I think it was. I don't know what that was for, right? Because it took you nowhere. You couldn't go university with it. And if you're up for a job with somebody with O-levels, the person with the O-levels was probably going to get the job. So it's just like we just set up this whole bag of schools that we call secondary schools. As I said, we made them inferior. And we just prioritize some of our children for success in the high schools. And it's like we put the others on a track for failure. And I'm not by any means saying that everybody who went to secondary school was a failure. Not at all. People went on to do all kinds of great stuff. But the reality is we made it harder for them. We made it harder for our children by just putting them in institutions and designating those institutions as inferior just by the way we set them up. So if people wanted to go on, for instance, they would then have to do private classes, like evening classes in O-levels, to get the qualifications they needed, which is what I mean when I say we set up these institutions. Is as if we were setting up our children for failure. And of course, all the prestige was with the high schools, right? And the quote-unquote bright children went to high school. And to this day, we're still struggling with that. And if you even listen to the language, because we still use a language of segregation. We still talk about traditional high schools and upgraded high schools, which is which used to be the secondary schools. And of course, the traditional high schools are still seen as more prestigious. But I think one of the worst parts of common entrance also was just the way in which the results were disseminated. Again, if you remember, if you weren't there, let me tell you, the results would be published in the newspaper. So the names of children who passed common entrance and would be moving on to high school were published in the newspaper. Remember, this was pre-internet. Yes, there was such a time. So people used to have to go out and buy Gleaner from before cock crow. As early as possible, people would try to get the Gleaner, and you would pour through looking for your name. That is how you know if you pass an exam or not, to move on to high school. And of course, the whole community now would also be going through the newspaper. Boy, if you see Jenny name, if you see Dionne name, if you see Johnny name, to figure out if you pass or fail. And the whole thing just have an element of cruelty to it when you look back on it. I have to say though, in terms of historical context, that the common entrance was still better than what went before. Because I remember my father telling me that common entrance was a big deal when it was introduced because it allowed thousands of poor people picnic to go to high school. Before that, it was only rich people who could afford to pay high school fees who could send their children to high school. And you used to have a scholarship exam that, children would take, and maybe one or two children from the entire parish would win a scholarship to go to high school. So again, it was a huge advantage on what was there before, even though it was problematic in its own way. So then GSAT replaced Common Entrance in 2009. Now my kids sat GSAT, so I was very familiar with that day one, which was traumatic in a whole different way. Children sat GSAT over 2 days, and the subjects were social studies, science, language arts, math, and then communication task. And that one, as I said, that was just pressure. And I always say, if your children do GSAT, it's like you sitting it, because if you help them any at all, by the time you go through all this material, you could almost sit the exam yourself. And it's hard to be objective about these exams, because like everybody else, I had my kids doing extra lessons on top of extra lessons, because you want them to do as good as they can do. You want them to get the best possible grade to get into one of these schools. And the whole process was really stressful for me. It was stressful for them. And I remember in particular, one of the things, just the whole heap of material they would have to cover that I thought was just so unnecessary and just too much. I remember, for instance, there was this whole table of rivers and mountains, and you would have to remember, you were supposed to learn which parishes the rivers were in or the mountains were in. And I remember I was like, hell no, we not do this. If this your question come on the exam, you just have to go pass it, because I'm just not studying that. No, you hear me? You hear the language? I am not studying that. Yeah, we are not studying that. And I look back sometimes and I wonder what it would be like if we could just have our children go to school. Sure, do the assessment exam in grade 6. That way you know how the kids are doing, where they are, what they need help with. But then just have them move on to high school without this whole heap of drama, with this exam that feel like your entire life is at stake. Or if it's your child, your entire child's life is at stake. And your success, whether they're going to be successful or not, is going to be determined by this exam. And of course, that's nonsense. But it's hard not to get caught up in that kind of societal fever. You know what I mean? So we had about 10 years of GSAT, and then came PEP, Primary Exit Profile. And that started in the 2018 to 2019 school year. One of the major changes with PEP is that it's supposed to encourage critical thinking skills as well as creativity. So as you can see, for instance, from this JIS report, Jamaica Information Service, PEP involves a series of assessments that start in grade 4 and end in grade 6. And they do performance tasks, they do ability tests, and they do the curriculum-based tests, in the areas like that's where you get the math, the science, the language arts, and the social studies. Now, the new president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Dr. Mark Smith, he's calling for a review of PEP because he says parents and children are complaining about burnout. So a review and evaluation, those are always good things in any system, in any new system, and PEP is still relatively new for us, or still new for us, I should say. But I maintain that this issue of burnout is not something that is going to be solved by a change, any kind of change in the exam, no matter what we call the exam, no matter how much different letter, how much different papers or whatever. That is not the main issue, because the main issue is the difference in our high schools and whether parents want their children to go to this school or that school. I mean, if you even listen to the language we still use, because remember, when GSAT came in and replaced Common Entrance was a pass-fail exam. GSAT is a placement exam. The issue of pass and fail now come into it when we're talking about GSAT, and yet we still have been using that language. We still talk about children passing for go this school or passing to go that school. So all of this, as I'm saying, is that the basic problem is that parents aren't happy with the quality of our schools. They don't think all the schools are equal, and clearly all the schools are not. They don't want their kids to go to this school or that school, and they want the children to go to, the name brand school. That's the kind of prejudice that all of us grew up with. But also, they look at some schools, the name brand schools in many cases, and they see them getting better results in exams. And we all want our children to have the best possible start in life. So clearly that's where most parents are going to want their children to go. Having said that, from the perspective of the schools, these same so-called name brand schools are getting the top students academically across the island. And if you are getting children who are coming to you with a 95% average, for instance, it's natural that your results are going to be better than those of the school that's getting kids that, may have issues in numeracy or literacy and need remedial work. So from the get-go, some schools have the odds stacked against them in terms of what kind of results they're likely to get and how people are then going to view them. Now, some of the kind of prejudice we have also is because we just don't know the work that some of these other schools, the so-called non-traditional schools, have been putting in. I mean, I've visited some of them and I've been so impressed. I mean, the plant is fantastic. All kinds of just wonderful things you see on the grounds, the quotes, the kind of work that's put in, the assistance that the children get, and all of that is always when you have, a visionary principal and a really good team in place. So what's the answer? Wouldn't it be nice if our children could just be automatically placed in the school nearest to where they live? Think of how much less stress that would be. Less stress on you as a parent, less stress on the child. Life would just overall be much easier. But as a Ministry of Education official that I spoke to today, I interviewed her today, and she said, look, Jamaica is just not ready for that. A lot of parents don't like the schools that are near to where they live, and they don't want their children to go to that kind of school. So I think you need to have some kind of complete overhaul of the entire school system, all the high schools, would have to decide on what's a basic standard that all parents would be happy with to have their child go to any school, even while we understand and acknowledge that you're always going to have some schools that are better resourced, especially when they have a very active and affluent past student community. Then I think we'd need something like a complete rebranding of the entire school system. And I don't know if it's a national conversation, public education, something, but we'd have to make parents comfortable with sending their child to any school and feeling comfortable that the child will be able to achieve his or her potential. And I don't think that's something you can get to overnight, because the thing is, parents want the best for their children, and one thing parents are not willing to experiment with is their children's future. Only part of things, not the children's future. So what do you think? Is this all a pipe dream, or do you see it happening in the not too distant future? And if so, how do we get there? Or do you think we're just doomed to have our children permanently in this pressure cooker system in grade 6, which would be really, really sad? Want to know your thoughts on this as well? And just a reminder, like the channel so we can help it grow. All right, have to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.